Well, Matthew,
Have to accept that.
excellent. So nice to have you here and so grateful for you to take the time.
Thank you.
So
It's good to be here,
meaningful.
Terry.
Oh, well, you're welcome. You're welcome. So, Matthew, we do know each other. How
Mhm.
long? 10 years?
More than 10 years,
Is it
so
more?
maybe
Wow. Let's
12.
say 12, 15 or something. We'll just add some years onto it. It's been amazing.
Indeed.
On the mat, we know each other
Hmm.
and
Yeah,
otherwise. So, really grateful.
and good times.
So, and what state are you or area of the world are you calling
I
in
am
from?
in Puerto Rico. I'm in San Juan, Puerto Rico.
Yes, nice. But I do know you from San Francisco,
Right.
where we know each other
Mhm.
face to
Yeah.
face, if you will. Okay.
Mhm.
So I'm going to share this quote and then I'll let you take it away. So, what is it like for a boy to come to life, or you to come to life in your mother's body, to know an infant's extraordinary fusion, your fusion, and identification with your mother, and then to have to define yourself as man? Floor is yours.
Wow, that's a lot. Covers a lot of ground.
Should I say it again?
Um, um, sure. Why not?
Okay. Yeah, especially if there's a lot of ground. Okay. Yeah. What is it like for a boy to come to life in a woman's body, you particularly, to know an infant's extraordinary fusion and identification with his mother, your mother, and then have to define yourself as man? Whatever
Right.
comes up.
Right. Well, a lot of that first part, I feel that I know from what I've been told.
Tell me more.
I don't remember being in the womb personally. Um, and I don't think I remember much before I was 2 years old. So, and there are many stories that I've heard
Mm.
about all those processes that happened. Um, I know that my mother smoked and drank through her pregnancy. Um, um, that was just the times. Um, I was born by cesarean, as was my brother, my one sibling. I know that I was not breastfed, as nor was my brother. Um, I also know that as an infant, I cried a lot, and so the solution that came up between my mother and probably her doctor, I assume, was that I should be drugged to keep me from crying.
Wow. What kind of drug are we talking about?
I assume a downer.
Mm.
I don't know, like a
Mm.
tranquilizer.
Mm. Wow. Okay.
um, yeah. So,
Mm.
um,
So your thoughts about, given that history, that story, the what are your feelings around this identifying, growing in a woman's body,
hmm,
identifying with her to whatever
mhm,
degree or in whatever form,
right.
and
Interesting.
whatever the situation is that you just described,
Mhm.
and then turning around and going,
Right.
okay.
Right. Well, I think I was very connected to my mother, and I felt that uh, in my early years, my father was not around much. I mean, my parents were married, um, um, but my father, I guess these days we call him a workaholic. He'd come home, sleep a few hours, change his clothes, and go back to work. Um, um, and that would be hard on anyone, I'm sure, any mother being left with two small children and feeling alone. But I think it was particularly, given my mother's personality, I think it was particularly difficult for her. And she was just someone who needed a lot of attention, and thrived when she was the center of attention. And she did not get that from being a mother to small children.
Meaning that she didn't demand that attention from you.
Oh, she certainly did, but it wasn't enough. So I was very aware of my mother's unhappiness from a young age, and always felt always wanting to make that better.
Feel that kind of void.
Right. Yes. And I think that was the beginnings of her becoming very dependent on me, and was for the entire time that we were both alive at the same time. And then my father died when I was 8 years old, and then that just intensified that aspect of the relationship. And I became her surrogate husband.
What was that like, Matthew, upon reflection? And what,
I guess because I kind of I had a reverence for my father. I idolized him, and so I guess that was a role I wanted to, at first anyway, in the early years, wanted to be able to fulfill, and felt like a privilege. But getting beyond, middle teen years, that gets a little bit weird. And especially if it continues when I'm in my 30s and 40s, then it gets a little, a little bit.
Can you give an example so that a little more clear what your experience was? That weirdness, or that what was expected, or the role?
Well, she expected me to always fulfill that role in any, family event, family weddings or something,
Meaning you were her.
Accompany her. I was her date. Even if I was involved in, even if I had a relationship. But then she also just made herself dependent on me, and kept that tie by, she liked to create emergencies. I'll put emergencies in quotes, that required me to show up, at a moment's notice and put out whatever fire had been created. And it was something that the whole relationship, that whole dynamic started at such a young age. And I think most teenagers go through a period of maybe it's individualizing from the parents and the family. And I didn't do that until I was probably my late 40s, where I started to see, this is weird. It's not healthy for either of us, but particularly me, and started to try to put some boundaries up.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, if you're open, so what I heard you say was that you didn't use the word idolize, but you really looked up to your father. Then he
Mhm.
passes away. And
Mhm.
so you're kind of standing up, like once,
Mhm.
maybe copying or, using that model as like who you'll want to be.
Mhm.
And then seeing that that role isn't real healthy when you get a little older or a lot older.
Mhm.
Um, where in this, if there was a place or a person or groups of people that where you started to see um, me being a man individuated from my mother.
Mhm. How did I
Yeah,
come to that realization, that
yeah.
process? Well, I remember one of my cousins. I was having a conversation with one of my cousins, and she was very close to my mother. Um, I remember saying, I think my brother mentioned something about, I don't know, that she's been a really good parent, and my cousin said, I don't know if I agree with that.
Mm.
And she said, you've always been there for her. She says, but it's taken to an unhealthy extreme. And she goes, I remember you were in college in Southern California, and she would call you up and say it was really important to clean out her garage. And you would drive home on the weekend to clean out her garage and then drive back to school.
Do you remember how you
Nobody
felt
does
at
that.
that? Yeah,
But
and how
nobody
did you
does that.
feel at that time about
It
those
was like,
requests?
about the request.
Yeah.
She needed something. We jumped.
So you
And
didn't
that was
like
something
resent
that was,
her. You were happy to do it.
oh,
You just,
there was probably some resentment, but it was a duty. And
yeah.
I think it was partly that it was instilled in us by our father, that you respect your mother, you do not talk back. These were like
Family rules.
really, yeah, drilled into us. And then also understanding her fragility, um,
Mm.
on some level. And then I think there was also, after my father died, my brother and my mother and me. Well, I guess this is where another time where I started to see the family dynamic from a distance, is when, I guess it was during my 30s. I did a lot of work with inner city kids
Mm.
who came from horrible backgrounds, parents who were drug addicts, who were physically abusive, sexually abusive, didn't provide for the kids food or money
Mm.
or whatever. But if you were to if you if you were to start to probe that relationship with the kid, or they would circle the wagons. They would defend that family
Protect and
structure.
defend. Yeah.
And I started to say, oh my God, we were doing that as well. My brother and I, we were defending, not that my mother was a drug addict or abusing us or anything, but we were defending her point of view, her worldview, keeping that, um, protecting that was a matter of survival, on a certain level.
If you were
Does that make sense?
to have stopped it or had the wherewithal or whatever, or desire to stop it, what would it be that you would be not surviving? Like, what do you remember?
We had, it wasn't that we were going to not eat. It wasn't that, I'd be kicked out of the house, but somehow keeping that oh, gosh, a friend of mine has a great term for it. What is it? The family trance. Keeping the family trance, making sure that the family trance does not get broken. Yeah,
Like a tribe's credo or something. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So during this time, you're growing up and you're playing this role, you're part of this family trance, etc. And when it's like, but you have some thoughts about becoming a man, like, you've got this dad idea, whatever. I don't know if you had other men that you looked up with, too, or groups of men, or do you remember thinking like, I can make myself a man, or how, especially when you're so
No,
connected
yeah.
with your mom. That's interesting.
That was very difficult for me because, there were some strong male influences in the neighborhood.
Mm.
Um, and I certainly appreciate their involvement, but it wasn't really enough because really did not, I really struggled on that, in that area.
Can you tell me more what you were struggling with?
Um, I just, my mother was not able to, I do have other friends who grew up without fathers and their mothers were, on top of it, pushing them into, you know, um, challenging them to, with their education and their school and their, getting them set up in, um, a career,
Mm.
even if that meant that they were living perhaps in another city. I have a good friend who had a mother who was really on top of that, and um, she was tough,
Mm.
and I, and he always, he always celebrates Father's Day with her as well as Mother's Day for that reason,
Wow. And
because
so
his
what
father
was
was
missing in your mom's way of
um, be,
mothering?
because I I feel like I didn't have any counseling. I didn't have anyone challenging me and pushing me out of the nest. It was just the opposite. I was kind of being,
Kept in
anytime
the
I
nest.
tried to make a move, it felt like, something would be put in my way, or, she was holding on to my ankles or something.
Got it. Very clear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Hmm. Anything else you'd like to say, given that quote, and just anything else? I've got one other quote to share with you to get your thoughts.
Mm. Nothing comes to mind right now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So there's a visual mother and son.
Mhm.
The son has donkey ears and a donkey tail, and the mother has said to him, "Your father was a jackass." So there is this idea that what sons hear and feel from their
Mhm.
mothers about men and maleness contributes to the man they will become.
Mhm.
Their thoughts. So it's men, I mean, the fathers, whatever influences, but also just maleness in general, a mother's idea about male. Any experiences that you can recall or
Mhm. It's not thinking of any experiences, but just in general, it felt like, mixed messages. On the one hand, my mother did, always held up my father as being an ideal man, um, but I think she also And she also idolized her own father, who left when she was quite young as well. But then she was quite deprecating toward her brother, which I think, and so I feel like, I think she saw me as somewhat of a combination of my father and her brother. So I felt like
Did she love me?
there
Did
were
she
there were
not?
mixed
Did she
messages.
like me? Did she not? Is that what you're saying?
It was confusing. It was confusing as to what my role should be. Yeah.
It feels like just your experience
Mm.
was confusing.
Yeah.
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 Interesting. So when you think of just your idea of maleness today and where your ideas or your beliefs or your emotions about maleness,
Mm.
like where they come from, do you defend them? Do you just, let it roll? I mean,
Well, I have a more, I have thought about this a lot. I have a more measured view of my father. I understand that he wasn't the sort of hero that we made him out to be, which is fine.
mhm.
Not to deprecate him, just that, he was a man of his time, and
And
wasn't
human.
around a lot, and human, and did not have a strong, his father died when he was young, did not have a strong model, as well. And I also, I find myself getting very emotional when I see functional families, whether it's in person or on TV, and especially when I see engaged fathers.
And when you see it, can you give me an example of what engaged means that touches you emotionally?
Oh, just that they can be supportive um, and kind and gentle, and at the same time provide the sort of direction and protection um, that probably everybody in the family needs.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah.
Mm.
Wow. Anything else you'd like to say before we close?
Um, I think of when I think of the mother-son relationship, and especially men becoming, or boys becoming men, it often just what comes to mind is the Bible story about Jesus when he's 13 or something. I don't remember exactly how it goes, but his mother comes to him and he says, "No, you're not my mother," or something like that. Or he makes it clear that the relationship has changed. He's gone through his initiation process at whether it was a bar mitzvah or I don't remember what. And he makes it clear that, our relationship is different now. And I think
Okay.
that's a very important step for boys to make when the time is right. And I think I hope that it is something that mothers can prepare themselves for
And their sons
and celebrate.
and celebrate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Wow. So grateful. So appreciate you being here, sharing your thoughts and your
Thank you.
heart and your
Thank you
experience.
for the
You're welcome.
opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you,
Yes, I think
Matthew.
Okay. Bye, Terry.